Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Birth Story podcast. If you are joining for the first time today, I'm your host, Alexis C. Girl mom, angel mama to one of the sweetest boys in heaven, birth trauma and uterine rupture survivor, and former NICU mama. Here you will have the opportunity to ask and have your burning questions answered by professionals, feel connected to other women's experiences as we normalize the different aspects of this journey we are on as moms. The real and raw moments of healing are shared here as we navigate loss, embrace strength, and find hope again while learning to live after loss. Please note the topics discussed on this podcast are for educational purposes only. Please see your personalized medical professional if you have any questions or concerns that arise from listening, including diagnosis and treatment. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Birth Story podcast. It has been a minute since I did a solo episode, so I'm super excited to do this today. And we're going to be talking about pregnancy after loss. I've been getting so many questions, even prior to conceiving my third baby, questions specifically for pregnancy after uterine rupture and just pregnancy after loss in general once conceiving that baby. So I myself honestly haven't really even talked about this, and I think it's because I haven't necessarily totally processed it myself and kind of how I got through that. So this is going to be good for me too. I often talk about how having these conversations really helps me process, grieve, and just kind of get through this journey. Not necessarily get through it, but get through it. So one of the first questions was like, how did you know you were ready to try again, or how did you know that you were able to try again, that kind of thing. So specifically speaking to uterine rupture, after we lost our son, one of my first questions was, can I have another baby? And luckily they were able to save my uterus during that surgery minimally. So initially, I was recommended to wait 2 to 3 years to conceive again. And that was without any follow-up ultrasounds. That was literally less than 12 hours after I had lost him, that was the recommendation. And so I basically got home after that, and I was so desperate to have another baby. Like, I would have literally had another baby, like, I would have got pregnant the next day, I swear. I immediately sat in my rocking chair in my living room and was Googling, how soon after can you get pregnant after uterine rupture? Can you have a pregnancy after uterine rupture? What is the success rate? That kind of thing. I was in this stillbirth Facebook group, support group, and I posted. I was like, obviously, I know I'm going to talk to my health professional, but like, I need a positive story here. Who has had a uterine rupture and who has had a successful pregnancy after losing that baby? And if that was the outcome. And basically, everybody was like, talk to your medical professional. I'm like, obviously, I'm going to, but I just needed something positive to give myself, some hope that I would eventually be able to carry and have another living baby. And so I think it was that. So we lost our son in September of 2022. I had found like a new health professional that was going to be taking care of us and my family. And I said that this was kind of something that I was definitely wanting to do. My wishes were to have another baby. And I wanted to know what my internal healing looked like. I didn't want to wait until I was ready to conceive. I wanted to kind of start that process really early on. And that way I kind of had an idea of what everything looked like. And so I was referred to an OBGYN because my GP, my general practitioner, or primary care provider, didn't feel comfortable in monitoring my situation, understandably. And so I went and met with this OBGYN. Basically, we talked about my history, what had happened, what my hopes were for the future, that kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's go for an ultrasound now. So this was January of 2023. and just kind of see what everything looks like. And so that's what we did. Everything that day was my first ultrasound since we had lost Cade, and I had so much damage to my bladder and my kidneys that I ended up having to go for an ultrasound a few days after we were discharged home to make sure that everything was functioning appropriately. And so outside of that, I had not had another ultrasound. So that day was my first one. I had a male ultrasound tech, and basically, obviously on my chart and what they see, they can see why I'm there. And of course, he still asked, like, oh, what brings you in today? And immediately I was emotional and kind of gave him a little bit of a background. And he was like, okay, well, we'll just like see what everything looks like. And so he did his external scan, and I was a mess. He was like, okay, so this is your first ultrasound since everything happened. I said, yeah. He's like, okay, do you mind if we do an internal exam as well? And then we can really see what that scar tissue looks like and where you are in your healing process. And so, yep, that's fine. We got ready for that. And then he was like, I'm not supposed to, tell you anything, but just for your peace of mind, just know that this looks like any scan that I've done on a mom who's had multiple C-sections. And so I was like, oh my God, that is like the best news I could receive right now. And so when I had met with my OBGYN, yeah, he went over all of that, and he said basically, definitely wait that 18 months. And just given that everything was healing beautifully, they called me a magic healer, which, I mean, thank God. And so he was like, it's never 100% recommended after uterine rupture to have a subsequent pregnancy. However, you are young. I know you're going to want to go have this baby regardless. And so let's have this baby together. And so fast forward to, well, I guess it would have been August of 2023. We were getting married. I was on some very heavy benzos. And I remember just being at work one day and being like, we just have to try for this baby. And my husband was like, babe, you are on these medications. Like, we need to wait. And I remember just being so frustrated. I'm like, okay, fuck it. I'm coming off the medications. Whatever. I just, I need to have this baby. And nothing else mattered in that moment to me. I did not process that, hey, maybe there's going to be a lot of anxiety with this. Maybe you're going to be a mess. Like, it's not going to be easy, but that never once really occurred to me prior to. And so we ended up starting to try in September, right after the wedding, and we fell pregnant in November. And I was crazy woman testing. Okay. If you know, you know. And everybody talks about the 10 DPO, 10 days past ovulation. And given what my app said, thought I was 10 days DPO, whatever. And peed on a stick, it was negative again. And I was so sad, obviously, because whenever you get a negative test, it's so sad. And when you get into that desperate state, it's like, not that it hurts even more, but it's just so heavy. And so I ended up, it was right before Christmas at this point, and I had a therapy session, and she was like, I'm wishing you the most gentle Christmas, and that Cade sends you a sign that he's with you. And then I went back into my treatment room. I was working that day, and one of my girlfriends was there as well, and I was like just crying. I'm like, I just want to be pregnant. Like, I don't understand this, that, and the other thing. And then that night I got home, and for some reason I marched into my house. I took a test, and immediately positive. I was like, oh my gosh, freaking out. I literally fell onto the floor. I was sobbing. My daughter had to be at dance in like 5 minutes. My husband comes in the door. He's like, oh my God, what now? He's like, you have the worst timing. And he comes, I'm like, come downstairs. You need to look at this or whatever. And he comes down and he like looks at it. And then he's like hugging me and he's looking at it. And he was like, this is what we wanted. Like, why are you so upset? I'm like, no, obviously it's like such a shock though, right? And I think in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I have set myself up to get so hurt again. I'm risking losing another baby. Like, what if my uterus doesn't compensate? Every bad thing, but also every good thing. I was just like, oh my gosh, can you believe it? I'm pregnant. Like, it was just so crazy. And so, fast forward a few days, the anxiety really kicked in. And I spent like all days crying and just trying to make sense of like what was going on. And I was literally just so scared. And so, to answer that initial question of when did I know or how did I decide, outside of just being in such that like desperate state, I followed up with a health professional, a specialist, for so many scans, so many opinions, and really just talked it out. And essentially, that is kind of how we decided that, yeah, this is like what we're going to do. And to preface all of this, if you are in a similar situation, 1000% find a provider that, and multiple providers if you need to at that, to give you the right advice as to whether or not you should proceed with a subsequent pregnancy. Everybody's body's different, everybody's situation's different. I did have a full rupture, and so it's through every single layer of tissue and completely burst open. And it was saved with one layer of stitching, which usually I believe it's 3 layers of stitching, two or three. So very minimally saved. And so always go and always push for ultrasounds, always push to like see kind of what's going on internally. And yeah, I spent lots of time with my therapist to try and prepare myself for not only the pregnancy after loss, but the delivery after loss. And so, another popular question I get is, how did you deal with the anxiety of pregnancy after loss? And to be completely transparent with you, I did not. I have a very, very good way of putting up a wall and not really feeling anything until I feel everything. And I do not recommend this. It is something I am working on. And my therapist worked with me a lot, and she tried to prepare me in the best way that she knew how. And ultimately, I could only be prepared as much as my body would allow me to accept and be prepared. And so I really just had to move through the motions. And looking back, it's actually really sad because I didn't take like any bump photos, which was super unusual for me. Even at the ultrasounds, like I took pictures like you normally would when the ultrasound tech's like, here, take a picture. I would do that. But I didn't really celebrate anything. And I feel like that was my body's way of protecting myself, that if this is a loss and I'm not attached and things like that, maybe it won't hurt as bad. And it's totally a lie. It's going to hurt like hell either way. But yeah, it's just really sad looking back. And I definitely talked to my therapist about that too, going through. She's like, girl, like you need to just take the pictures. Like you don't need to post them. You don't need to do anything like this, but take the picture, because regardless of the outcome, and we're praying for a good one, you're going to want those pictures eventually. And so I want to say I was like pretty close to when we ended up delivering that I started to take these pictures and things like that. I wish I would have started before, but also give myself so much grace for the fact that I was just not in a space to be able to do that. And so, yeah, it was a roller coaster. And so many people when you're pregnant, focus on the good, which I did too before. And now I'm in a space where I focus heavily on the negative, not even the negative, the what if, like, or if this baby gets here, or if we bring this baby home. It's not when anymore for me. And that was something I really had to work on as well is obviously there was nothing more that we wanted than to bring this baby home. However, I was really only preparing myself for the worst case scenario. And so even when it came to like we had Kate's nursery still set up in the basement, which is actually the room that I do this podcast in. And I didn't want a single thing moved until this baby came home. And I was the one to be like, okay, we can now move this. I had friends and like my husband really wanted to set everything up for us when we were in the hospital. I'm like, please do not go in that room. Do not move anything. I left all the clothes hung up as they were for Cade. I left the like rocking chair, bassinet, everything. Diapers were still lined up in the basket that we had for him. Everything was still set up for Cade. And, uh, moving it would have maybe been like accepting that this baby was coming home. It could have been healing, but for me, I wasn't ready to take away his space, Cade's space, until this baby was home. That was huge, huge, huge for me. And so that was another piece of that anxiety is just living in this state of what if the worst of the worst happens again? I need to be as prepared as I can for that than anything else. Whether or not that's the best thing I could have been doing, that is what served me in that moment. I think a lot of lost moms can agree that they kind of processed maybe the same way. And even leading into the delivery of pregnancy after loss, it's, well, for me specifically, I lost during delivery. And so there was no safe zone until maybe that baby was home. But even then, I'm, aware enough now that really there's no necessarily safe zone. However, it was the delivery aspect for me that was so anxiety provoking. I was a mess at thinking about having to be back in an OR, just not knowing what that outcome was going to be. That is where I kind of put in my heart and soul to try and prepare myself for, what maybe that outcome could have been. I know that there are some medications that are considered safe during pregnancy. I did not go that route. I stopped my medications prior to trying to conceive, and then I started them again back in November after I had Case. And so that can be a resource as well. Again, find a professional that you trust and really vibe with to kind of pick those options for you. My sole thing that I did was definitely therapy, and she would give me like exercises or homework to do in between my sessions to try and hone in on maybe what is being brought up that is provoking the anxiety or what I'm most fearful for. Another thing I was very fearful for was leaving my daughter at home to go deliver this baby. And at no point did I feel comfortable enough to tell her that this baby's for sure coming home. And I think she felt that too. She was always very involved, but definitely was scared as well. And was so attached to me when I had to go to the hospital. But last time we left her, I told her, oh, we're going to go deliver your baby. See you tomorrow. We'll introduce you to your brother. And so there was like a lot of different factors that played. It wasn't just myself. It wasn't just my husband. It was our eldest daughter who had also been through a stillbirth. So that adds a whole other realm to it. But that was something I really had to walk through or work through too, trying to process that, you know, boundary of what's safe to say and maybe what's not. And then, of course, when we ended up delivering, or my water broke early and our abnormal ultrasound, which I'll get into when I unpack my NICU story, but there's just so many different pieces that come into play that maybe you don't necessarily think about. And so the supports of whether it's other lost moms, family members, friends, your provider, anything that you can cling on to during that pregnancy, or anything you need to do to protect yourself. And another thing, coming back to the beginning, is I waited so long to post that I was expecting this baby. And I'm not sure if that came from a place of selfishness, that I wanted this entire baby just to myself, and maybe it was a way of protecting our peace and what have you. But I shared very openly when we lost Cade, and I see the impact of how that impacted everybody around me. And so to post that his sibling was on their way was also a powerful moment when I allowed myself to do that. But I remember just like posting it and literally throwing my phone. I'm like, I don't want to know anything. And now, like, hearing people's stories, they were like, oh, as soon as we told us, like, we were so worried about you. We were like, we just prayed every night that this baby and that you were okay. And, you know, I go back and forth between keeping it to myself private and sharing, but ultimately, like, you have so many people rallying around you that, and I mean, do whatever feels right in your heart. But I'm, I love talking about it, and I love sharing the good, the bad, the hard, the amazing, it all, it all definitely helps. And I appreciate when I see other people being vulnerable, sharing their story. And so I guess that's why we're here. Another question I had: what supports are available for me during pregnancy after loss? And I talked about that medication piece. I talked about the therapy piece, the provider that is supporting you. My provider protected my heart as much as he could. I love that he had scans every time we went to a prenatal appointment. And the first time I went was the first time I seen like a full baby on the screen, and just to see his little heart flickering, and I was just, oh, I was a mess. And he was just like held it there and let me watch the heart flutter. And then, after a few minutes, like, are you done? And it was really, really sweet. And just, I was like, can I take a video? Can I take a picture? And yep, yep, please. I encourage it. And so that was super special. But again, just finding those people that can rally around you and support you, and that are willing to go the extra mile, especially any type of loss. You want to really make sure that everything's okay, whether that's extra scans, extra blood work, extra anything, fetal Dopplers, every appointment. I never had one at home because that would have made me even more crazy, I think, is if I had it at home but wasn't able to find a heart rate due to how I was using it or whatever. That would have just provoked way more in me. And so I made the personal choice not to. And I do recommend that if you do have one, maybe talk to your provider to make sure that you're using it appropriately and whatnot, as it does have sound waves and stuff for the little babe. But yeah, really just finding that provider is what helped me. And then managing this pregnancy, yeah, with your health provider. Find one that really vibes with you. And I spoke about this in another episode about the lady I was sitting down with was talking about like interviewing and almost like speed dating providers, whereas I always just like had it in my head that I wanted this one and then that was okay. And I maybe one point in time that didn't work out in my favor, obviously. However, subsequent times it did. And so if you are not 100% in on your provider, date around, feel it out, and voice your concerns. I cannot talk about that enough, especially, there's you can have your general practitioners, you have your OBGYNs, which are good for specific pregnancy related things, especially high risk or if you've had um, devastating outcome, those kinds of things. But with like the nurse practitioners coming in and that kind of thing, specifically towards mental health, I was talking till I was blue in the face about how I was different before loss and after loss. And I'm not sure if it was just the providers in general. I was speaking with male providers and it was like, yeah, okay, thanks for telling me your story. Here's these pills. No follow up whatsoever. And almost like a little bit of uncomfortability, which I mean, okay, you don't really, like, you can't relate to me at all. And I guess that it is what it is. And so I got so sick and tired of that I ended up switching our care. And my therapist has set the bar for me so incredibly high, which I mean, okay, that's her job as a therapist is to support me in all of this. But she's always been there and she listens. And then she provides care based on all of the listening that she's done. And that is what I needed. I didn't want someone who was just going to write me a prescription and, okay, you let me know. I needed somebody that I could really relate to. And so now that I've done that, and, I guess this was my version of dating providers, was, this is my fourth one now. And finally, I found somebody that was willing to hear me out and meet me where I was at instead of just writing me a prescription and being like, okay, good luck. And so definitely taking that time to slow down and ensure that you are receiving the absolute best care that you can. Pregnancy after loss is no joke. And no matter what type of loss, even if you haven't necessarily lost, but you had a very, very, very traumatic birth that almost resulted in loss, or just a very, very traumatic birth, and you find out you had underlying conditions or things like that. If you do not have a provider that is going to bat for you, what are you doing? Like, we need to find somebody else. If somebody's not willing to do extra ultrasounds for you, find someone else who will. These are things that make the world of difference. Even when you're in your ultrasound, your history is there. Generally, your provider is putting your history on your form. Mine always said pregnancy after uterine rupture, full term. And so they always had that, and they did slow down for me. And just that extra compassion, the extra step of making sure that everything is absolutely okay and that we are not missing anything. We cannot miss anything. It's 2025. We can't be missing things. And especially if you know the history of your patient, let's take a moment and give a little more. And then let's take a moment for even our patients that haven't lost and give a little more. So if there was something in our control that we could have done to prevent maybe this negative outcome, devastating outcome, negative outcome doesn't even, it's not an appropriate term doesn't hold enough weight for what we've been through. But just, I'm going off on a tangent now, and I feel like I should be giving a speech to medical professionals. But as patients and as moms and as prenatal care receivers, we need to be going the extra mile as well to be advocating for ourselves and being confident enough to do that, and having a little bit of education and knowledge and everything that we are sharing on this podcast, taking those little pieces and putting them in our back pocket. So when we go to these appointments, we can stand our ground and be confident enough. And if you have a provider that doesn't care if you come back or choose somebody else, choose somebody else. Like my OBGYN, when I'm going to give a little bit into my NICU story. My PPROM. Um, when I went in and I had this abnormal ultrasound and I had to be shipped up to the city, he was literally like, "You took away my spotlight. Like, I was supposed to give you this." I'm like, "Okay, I wanted you to give me this just as badly as you did." And to have a provider that they want this so badly for you and ended up like calling me to check in after and be like, okay, what's the status? Like, is this baby in? Are we delivering? Kind of like what's going on? And then being so invested after that when you end up having this miracle baby, they are just as excited for you. And those are the providers that we need. I work alongside one that always talks about what an honor it is to deliver these babies for these moms. And that's not just moms after loss. This is any mom who's expecting. That is the provider you want that knows how special their job is to give you the absolute best care to ensure your safety, your baby's safety. Again, those should not be pieces of your birth plan. Those should just simply be expectations that your care team is automatically going to provide for you. If you are in a position of pregnancy after loss, trying to conceive after loss, be so gentle on yourself and do not be afraid to speak up. Please do prepare yourself for the anticipated anxiety that could be a huge part of this pregnancy, this subsequent pregnancy. Also, try and bask in what a miracle it is. And we talk so much about how the grief and the sadness and the heaviness and the heartbreak also coincides with the joy and the happiness, and trying to find that boundary of celebrating both. It doesn't make it any easier or any harder if you had an early loss at maybe 6 weeks, and this pregnancy, you're at 8 weeks and you have that beautiful, beautiful heart rate. We need to try and celebrate that. It's not going to be easy, and I'm not going to say that. It's hard as hell. But trying to find that space to be like, oh my God, this is such a win today. This beautiful miracle. It's a lot easier said than done, because I tried to celebrate those little ones, but I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was always scared. I remember going in, and even if I could feel this baby dancing in my tummy, when I went into that ultrasound, I wanted to just cry. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to run out of there, because what if they were going to tell me something was not okay? Even though I could feel that things were okay. This feels good, but it's just, again, those anxiety pieces. Every scan, every position of having the Doppler on, every time you walk in to deliver this baby, every time if you go in for an NST, depending on where you lost in your pregnancy, or where you experienced that trauma, that birth trauma, the pregnancy trauma, all of those things. And for each of us, maybe we have a different version of what a safe zone is. And for me personally, there's no such thing as a safe zone anymore. However, if you can hold on to these little pieces, that could be your goal. I always had a goal. If I can make it to this, then this should be okay. If I can make it to this, okay, I can make it to the next week. Again, I think those were subconscious things that now that I reflect back, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I did do that. Or I did feel this in this moment, but again, I am a sucker for these walls that I put up, and I try not to feel. And it's a very unhealthy thing for me to do. However, it's a protective mechanism. And those protective mechanisms are there for a reason, and we do need to honor them. However, we also need to give ourselves permission that if maybe they aren't benefiting us, it's okay to knock them down and find a different way to protect our hearts. And if you are expecting a baby after loss, if you just delivered a baby after loss, I am sending you so much love, so much strength to give yourself grace. And I'm just holding so much space for you. And I pray that you were able to get through it, and that hopefully it was a gentle season on you. And I know that's a weird concept, like, oh, how the hell could that be gentle after, I've been through literal hell. But there can be pieces that you celebrate. There absolutely can. And I really hope that you were able to find those little pieces that you could celebrate, and that one day you will celebrate an absolute miracle. And at no point will that miracle take away what you've been through. It will not make it easier. It will not replace. It will not fill a void. It will not erase the past. It will simply, hopefully, make what you've been through a little bit easier. And that doesn't even sound right. Not even a little bit easier. I just hope that you can reflect back and be like, oh my gosh, I went through all of that, and now I have this here. And I just hope it can heal your heart a little bit. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Please take a moment, and on whatever app you're listening to us on, press that follow button to stay up to date with all future episodes. If you or someone you know are interested in being a guest on the Beyond the Birth Story podcast or a sponsor, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at Beyond the Birth Story podcast and send a message or fill out that contact form. I would love to connect with you. As always, remember to be gentle, kind, and hold space for yourself when you need it.